and a dépanneur, which is a common story of many Chinese families.
The language of convenience stores. Immigrants finding their way in the new land through the operation of a convenience store is a worldwide phenomenon. In the US, especially in New York, you have bodegas. In the UK, off-license stores or offies. In Germany, Spätis or Spätkaufs. And in Quebec, they're called dépanneurs. Anywhere in the world there are immigrants, there is the equivalent of a corner shop. I thought about how hard a transition it must have been for Julian's parents, and especially his highly educated father, to be working at a convenience store. It's again the story of so many immigrants, to not have access to the kind of work they were trained and qualified to do, and certainly not able to contribute with their full capacities to the society they were living in. For Julian's father, things took a turn for the worse.
I tell people it's the ice storm of 98. But I'm not actually sure if it's the ice storm or not, because how scrambled my memory is. Could have been 96, could have been 97. I never really talked to my parents about it, what year it was. But my dad had a horrible car accident. The car skid on the ice, and he hit a tree, apparently. So I saw the car. The memory of the car is fairly imprinted on my memory. It was like half the size.
Wow.
And he was in ICU for a little bit, and he came out, not quite the same. So there was a very striking memory there, which is that Mia and my dad, he taught me how to play Go, the Chinese game of Go, black and white pieces. And my dad is quite good at Go, a lot better than I ever got. And I remember after the trauma, after he hit himself, we were playing. And I realized I was going to be very easily going to be able to crush him. His ability to play Go had badly descended. And I had to pull back. I pulled back and I let him win, because I couldn't tolerate winning. Not like that, He was a totally different person after the accident. The violence that was always there got much worse. So there were social workers, police, there was the rigmarole,
Wow.
And so it was not a very happy period. We were on welfare for several years after that.
With Julian's father's ability to work compromised through this traumatic accident, Julian's mother now had no choice but to put herself to the test and find a way to provide for the family on her own. Let's not forget that Julian's mother came from the countryside. Unlike Julian's father, she spoke only Chinese and had not had the benefit of higher education as his father did. However, survival demands resourcefulness and ingenuity, and Julian's mother found a way through.
But my mom, amazingly, good for her, she's a village woman. So she came to Canada not knowing the 26 alphabets. But after that incident, during the years of welfare, she went off and enrolled in a business school in one of these job retraining centers. Learned Microsoft, learned English, learned French. To this day, I don't know how she did it, over the period of about 3 to 4 years when we were on welfare. And she found a job. It's pretty amazing.
Incredible.
So my mom ended up being an administrator at a college for many years, which is a crazy thought when you think that she's a semi-literate, even in Chinese, that she's this villager. It's like we saw 150 years of historical development rolled into my mom's one life.
Yeah, she was just like, accelerate.
Yeah, it was a major role reversal in the family. My dad used to be the boss. He was one with the language skills. He was one who was supposed to provide, even if he didn't do so clearly. But there was that totally clear role reversal. We actually did much better.
And it was like putting the right person into the right role for the circumstance.
Correct. Amazingly enough, eh?
Yeah.
So that's my memory actually picks up. So after we were better financially, so I was probably about 18, 19, my memory comes back. So it must have been less stressful at home. And I was doing better. I don't say it much these days, but I did very poorly in high school. Fairly clear why to me these days. But to my parents, considerable distress. I did very poorly in school.
Yeah.
But once family settled a little bit, I started doing better in school. And they, I think, were very pleased by that as well.
The protective mechanisms we develop as children to deal with inordinate levels of stress are fascinating. Memory loss is a trauma survival skill that can help a person to cope by allowing them to temporarily forget details of the event until they're ready to process in a more conscious way. Julian talking about his memory loss made me wonder how much of my own childhood I might not be remembering. If you don't remember what you don't remember, how do you know what you're missing? If you enjoy Beyond Asian and you'd like to hear more stories being produced here in Europe, then you'll be happy to know there is so much more where this came from. Bay Radio is Berlin's English-speaking podcasting network and community and home to a number of incredible shows. If you'd like to hear more about the thinkers and creators who propel our culture, then look no further than Tanty Table. Tanty Table is Berlin's first English-speaking podcast hosted by an all-women of color panel. In each episode, the hosts Ria Ramjan, Armagan Tahiri, and Hoitzi Moncho invite special guests to the table to discuss everything from the breaking of stereotypes and assumptions about women of color in Europe to travel, intimacy, friendship, bad dates, and much more. Another favorite of mine is the first Polish addition to the Bay Radio family, Stories from the Eastern West. This podcast shares little-known histories from Central and Eastern Europe that changed our world. There's their miniseries, The Final Curtain, that features personal tales from the Eastern Bloc's collapse. And they just dropped a brand new third season, which includes stories from the exclusion zone of Chernobyl, the start of the 1980 revolution in Poland, and a chaotic story of what was meant to be Europe's greatest science fiction film. Join hosts Nitzan Reisner, Adam Żuławski, and Wojciech Oleksiak as they bring each of these stories to life. Finally, there's writer and DJ Paul Hanford and his podcast Lost and Sound. Paul goes on a journey to uncover how people come together through music, honing in on the cultural hotspots of Berlin, Kiev, and now, with a third season, remote locations across the world. He meets artists from a range of disciplines and explores themes such as the connection between music, cities, and identity, and how music can play a role in our lives in the future. There are currently 22 podcasts and hundreds of episodes available for you, so head over to bearradio.org and get listening. Can you remember anything from those years?
I remember a few significant events, usually on the horrible range of things, and more as photos than as moving memories. And to this date, I have no clear recollection of the interiors of most of the homes we live in. Very little. Sometimes things will trigger off memories, but then the memories disappear, and I don't know what came up a little while ago.
Mm-hmm. What is it like to be living with such a big gap in the formative years of your childhood?
As we know, I'm a psychiatrist. Almost as part of our training, we are in therapy. I'm still in therapy. The strongest word I can find for it is that's very sad. I have a chunk of my life missing a little bit. It was very, very hard. Mm-hmm. It was important for me to be able to block those things off. I think it speaks to a certain character in me that I was able to block it off. I don't think I would have done well if I wasn't able to block certain things off. The repression's there for a reason. It's not there for nothing. So it's sad that I lost big chunks of my life, but I'm pleased that I could ward off a lot of that pain. The first 2-3 years weren't bad. I still have some good memories from those years, mostly of my dad teaching me stuff. He taught me the Tang Dynasty poetry. Mm-hmm. He taught me the analects. So astonishingly enough, I have a reasonably good grasp of classical Chinese, which you don't expect in a kid who came when they're 6. And that formed the foundation even for my Chinese studies these days when I studied it myself. So that's something he did very well. So that part I do remember.
I remember that when Julian and I were doing our respective science degrees, that he, at the end of his degree, decided to apply for medical school. Not having known his backstory at the time, this didn't surprise me. I figured he was just following the path that most other med school-bound Asians I knew were doing. It was only a few years later, when he told me that he was specializing in psychiatry, that I saw something was different about the way Julian was approaching things. Psychiatry is a field that requires a specific kind of interest in the human condition, and does not present straightforward and easily executable solutions compared with other branches of medicine that are less existential. Especially taking into account the fact that there was this big piece of Julian's past locked away somewhere in his mind, this made psychiatry an even more fascinating choice. This was the first time I asked Julian the question, what was it that motivated you to want to get into this field?
So that's a very interesting question. So I didn't want to be a doctor. I wasn't entirely conforming Chinese kid. I did very poorly in high school, as I said. Due to pressures from everyone, I applied to medical school once. The first time I applied, I didn't get in. They asked me, what would you do if you didn't get into medicine at the interview? And I looked at them straight in the eye. I was like, I'd make a fairly good mathematician. I'm not sure if that answer helped or hindered my application to med school. But anyway, I didn't get in. And so I wanted to be a scientist first and foremost. I got a degree in biology, but also got a degree in mathematics. And I enjoyed the heck out of both. And I was doing research, and I loved the research, the ability to put things together, to see more deeply into a phenomenon than anybody's ever seen before. That is profound. That's a big part of me. But so near the end of university, I was like, what am I going to do? And I'm very much like you, I guess. I had no idea what to do with myself. I had no idea. So I wanted to be a scientist, but I realized I really did not want academia. The pay was poor. I know that sounds crass, but the pay was poor. Chances are low. The stress enormous. So near the end of university, I took a year off to figure things out. I was in China. At that point, my ideas had changed, as young people often do. I played a lot of video games. I thought I was going to become a concept artist for Blizzard, the video game company. And they were hiring straight out of China at that point. So I figured I'd go. So I spent a year in Nanjing studying fine arts. And Yueden had been my girlfriend already at that point, and she really, so I was on a knife's edge. What am I going to do with my life? And she really gave me that little bit of a push to go down. So she was like, give this a try. Give this medicine thing another try.
Give this medicine thing a try. I hear it's pretty good.
It was actually more like, I'm going to break up with you if you don't find a reasonable career. So to be completely, I was so ambivalent that I applied to a single program, right? I applied to one program. And not only that, but I didn't want to give up on my academia hopes. So I applied to the MD PhD, which is even harder to get in, And that was the biggest dice roll of my life, because I had actually no idea if I was going to like being a doctor. I had never volunteered in a hospital. I had done nothing medicine related.
Wow. So this is your version of putting all of your eggs in this basket.
But to my utter astonishment, I loved it. I had no idea I was going to like medicine before I got into it. And I truly had no idea. I never sat at the doctor's table. But then I really did like it. So for me, I have to say, in Med 3 was actually when I first encountered psychotherapy. So I come from a traditional Chinese family. I had no idea psychotherapy was a thing. It did not exist in my concept of things. Mm-hmm. There was no idea that you could talk to people and regulate your feelings that way. This is a very strange idea to me. But then I had bumped into a few extraordinarily talented therapists. And then I realized in the therapy room, there was as much intensity, as much craziness bouncing off the walls as there is in any operating room. Because it's very much a similar concept. There's no pill there doing your work for you. There's you, your skills, and the pathology that is present in front of you that is cruelly torturing the patient and destroying the patient's life. And all you've got is your training, your reflexes, your ability to think on your feet to try to do something with that. I absolutely adore it. And that's what for sure, that's what led me into psychiatry. Also, once I opened up this concept of psychiatric concept, I realized how it applied to myself, how it applied to my family, how my family, and including myself, could have been helped many years ago. Yeah. It didn't happen, but I could do it for a lot of other people, which is why this ambition of taking care of a lot of the Chinese families came up in me. And it turned out to be a really great fit.
The way Julian chose psychiatry was also how I eventually chose to become a mental health occupational therapist. Not having had much education in these topics before, the first time I encountered psychosocial frameworks to understand the inner workings of the mind and the self, I felt like I had learned a new language to describe the world. I learned about different ways to understand the nature of mental and emotional maladies, how they originate, how they're experienced, and how they could be treated. Suddenly, it felt like I had a portal of clarity into my own experiences and that of others. And naturally, I wanted to use what I'd learned to help myself and others like me through their own clouds of confusion. On the topic of psychosocial frameworks to understand the inner world, there was a question that had been burning in my mind to ask Julian. Given your field of knowledge in both the Eastern and Western traditions, one of the most important questions that has come to my mind is when we think about Asian mental health and we apply the framework of Western psychology to the things that Asian people experience, whether they're still in their countries in Asia or whether they've immigrated to other countries, does it even make sense to apply that framework to what they're experiencing? Because we don't have that same framework in our own culture. When we talk about things like mood disorders, like bipolar disorder, clinical depression, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about personality disorders, borderline personality disorder is one of the more common ones. Do these terms, can they even be applied to people who come from a different cultural background?
So this is a very profound question. It touches on two questions: the difference between East and West, and to the degree